Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to take the next half an hour or so to talk you through the latest additions to IC 2021 and how that's going to improve your workflows. As any of you that have met me before will know, I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint. I'd rather just get into IC and start using its presentation capabilities directly. However, for today I am going to spend a few minutes on the introduction for today's webinar using a few PowerPoint slides. So there's been a lot of minor enhancements that have come together to allow us for this year to focus more on the exploration toolkits for 2021. Where IC 2019 was focused on the data management and the database security side of things, what IC 2021 is focusing on is the exploration, the correlations and visualization. You'd think I've said that before. So that's what we're focusing on for 2021, the exploration side of things. However, as part of that, of course, we always want to listen to your feedback, work in the enhancement requests that you have given us, have requested of us, and as much as we can try and get those into the next release. One of the big visual impact improvements that we have added to 2021 have been the gradient ties and the spectral ties. Now these are working with other data, so curves for the spectral ties or the formations, for example, or the members that you may be working with in your data to build these coloured gradient ties. On top of all of that, of course, we have the standard day-to-day chart improvements that we've added. For example, the ability to snap depth and set a thickness when you're adding new units. We'll get onto that when we're in the demo. The other big visual change that you'll notice is a new interface for importing files. When you import ASCII files in older versions of IC, it was a very simple interface. And yes, this one might look a little daunting to start with, but once you start using it, I promise you won't know how you managed before. So there's several new elements to the import for ASCII files, and well, header files in this case, and they're all done in one form now. So as you step through the import process, you have additions to the merge options when you're bringing in new data where old already exists. We have a new ability to save a setup so that if you have dozens of files coming in that have the same setup, you can reuse your options and save yourself a lot of time. And then at the end, once you've imported the data, we have a new report that's interactive that will highlight to you where there are data you need to go and manually QC, and where wells have pulled in, created new wells, added new data. All of that information is stored and is filterable, as it were. So when we're working with those files, all of that should save you a lot more time. When it comes to the mapping side of things, we've improved the stratigraphic awareness when it comes to bubbles, and allowed you actually a deeper look at the bubbles as well. So not just looking at a single zone of interest, but subzones within that overall zone. So when you're looking at your exploration project, you can dig that little bit deeper, including that alongside that ties improvements that we've done. So the detail of the ties downhole across that region, we truly are improving that exploration purpose. Alright, so now on to the demo. What I'll do is turn my camera off so you don't have to be distracted by me chatting at the same time. Alright? So here we are in IC 2021 Interactive Correlations. Now I want to go over four main areas today in our demonstration, and I know we'll be tight for time, so I'm going to try and get through as much as I can. If you've any questions, like Andy says, please pop them up in the webinar question section and we'll get to them at the end, and if we run out of time we will email you with any answers. Alright? The first thing I want us to go through is importing data. So realistically, you will have some wells, or you might be starting. It's variable. What hopefully you'll see now is a map that I have a range of wells on here with queries that you've built, could have been in 2019. So prior to 2021, nothing has changed with the queries. The discrete import button prior to now had a drop down that you chose a single well or a multi-well file type. What happens now is we have a single interface, and as I said, it might look a little daunting, but once you get used to the breakdown of the areas and step through methodically, it will not be that daunting. So the first thing we need to do is choose our file. So I'm choosing an Excel file, where I can choose which data coverage I want to include. It has a range of discrete data, well header information, and log data. Now, obviously, normally you would have a different file perhaps for each of those, and that's where the templates can come in handy. What you do once you've chosen your data coverage, you can then set up the defaults. Are the depths feet meters? Is it measure depth TVD? That kind of thing. Everything you had before. What is similar, though moved from previously, is the column matching. So we have our column of incoming attributes and data coming in, and then we have what's in the database. So it tries its best to match what it can, and the rest will become unmapped for you to go in and tell it what these are. So this is different and a lot more broad than it was previously. Alright, so I know that these are from well headers, so I have an alternate 1 name, I have an alternate 2 name. Now if I had well header information that I wanted to include but wasn't in the database already, I could go into anything unmapped, and under the well header section there's a create attribute button which will pick up the name from the file you are importing, allow you to add a description, and off you go. It adds to the bottom of the list just like all the other manually entered attributes. When it comes to the discrete data tables, you can choose the columns that you would find in any data browser, so the dip, the azimuth, the openworks, qualifiers, that kind of thing, your source, your boundary styles. When you have deviation data, you can choose the appropriate data type that will be populated there. Depth is important. This is where all of the data hangs from. It's your single depth going forward. The well name itself is what's going to be tried to match to in the next step. When it comes to the data types in here, you just need this to say it's the data type. So the column itself is the name of the data type and the data sits underneath it. Alright, a double click closes all of this, matched, matched, matched. And down at the bottom here, it's telling me I have curve type. So it's the same thing. This is the name of the curve and the data hanging underneath is the values. Now, if at any point you didn't remember or you didn't know what each of those columns were, then you can hit the preview and it will show you the names that are now mapped in the incoming file, from the incoming file. If you have several that are sitting at unmapped, there is an option there to have them be like a cached to unmatched for data types or curve types, and you just hit the map button there. Down at the bottom, now this is the bigger section. This is where you can map the data incoming to the data table and data type internally, and again the interpretation that you want to populate. There's elements here for filtering, so the columns in here, if you start typing in any kind of text string that may have the letter that you're typing in there, it can filter that, and what the filtering allows you to do is have an update to the import style for the visible list. As soon as you remove that, you'll see that everything else wasn't touched, it was just those visible. And you can change these independently or as a a whole. Alright, so what happens, the 4 import options are skip, so we may have mapped this column to the database but I don't want to pull anything in. The merge then requires an element from the drop down above. Then you've got the combine and overwrite and add new. So the combine, depending on if you're discrete data or curved data, it means slightly different things. Okay, and it gives as much information as it can in the text associated. Or overwrite is just replace everything that was in the database and pull in what we are doing. When it comes to the merge options, you need to decide whether what's in the database takes priority and is kept, and the new file incoming data is added in some way. Where there's overlaps, what do you want it to do? Alright, so this is where you need to decide whether you are going to remove things or keep everything to then QC later yourself. Okay. And you can again choose which elements you wish to update these to. Again, for the interpretation, same kind of thing, set everything in the list to a different interpretation, discrete data wise. My database, I don't have interpretations on for my curves, so that won't be modified. Again, the create unmatched, so if you have any data types that aren't mapped to a destination that you're happy with, you can pop them into a new location. Once you have this set up, you can go in and save this as a template. So again, you might have a contractor that will be sending you multiple files, same formats. You can decide whether it's a tab separated, header rows, second header rows if there's units in there, for example. Knowing to skip those are important. Whether your meters or feet's important. Then the mappings here and the import settings down here are all saved under a template or individual sections. You know, it's a tick on and off to save those. And the list appears here. So the next time, now that you've set this up, you can quickly load those and everything will step you forward rather than have to do it again and again. So the next step we take is into the well matching. Previously in IC 2019 or before, you would have been presented that little box that helped you match up and you'd have to double click or create all. This is a much cleaner and nicer way to do this. It's also opened up our options. In 2019 and previously, IC allowed you to match on well names or the code in the database. This 2021 has blown that wide open and allows you to match unique wells to any of the well attributes. So you can see up at the top corner here we have a column of a list of all the attributes that we have for the wells in the database. We also have a selected column, so this is a short list of the elements that are available to us. Now we have an order set up by default. You can change these. So we have well name first, we have alternates, we've got UWI, we've got APIs, that kind of thing. We can remove any of these just by using the right click and left click buttons. What this is going to do is from our incoming file, check against those columns that we have matched up our well name or alternate 1s and 2s, for example, and check for a match. Now the file I'm pulling in, I have rows of what say are the same well name, but have different alternate 1 and 2s in there. So what we need to find is the match for that. So if we scroll down here to this table, this is the wells that we have, and you'll see that in the database I've got 3 rows here coming up with the same well name and a 4th that's doing a straight match name to name. What's happening is I have the file, so this side here from code, alternates and APIs and UWIs, these are from the incoming file. So if I have matched up alternate 1s and 2s, you'll see I have different names for these, and I've mapped them to alternate 1s and 2s. If I reorder these, so originally it was sorting on well name first, if we change those and hit rematch wells, It's going to tell us, well, if you've manually mapped anything, that's going to be overwritten. That's fine, I haven't done any of that yet. What it's doing now is it's searching for alternate 2, alternate 1, and then well name from the file. So hopefully you've noticed that I now have 4 different well names down here, and they match based on the alternative choices on that order. So the ordering of this is important. It will work in as soon as it finds a match in the well name, for example, if that's first, that's what you get the match on. If you choose a different one, it works on those ones first. Now, the unnamed well is because in my incoming data coverage selection, I had an empty cell, and I don't want an unnamed well coming in there. So I'm just going to skip that. I can go in and skip all of these really quickly by hitting update. This drop down gives you the 4 choices. You can create a well straight from the file, you can update a well header, you can match but with no header update, so this is more for the data pulling in, and then you have the skip, so just ignore that section of that well that you found in the file. Okay, up at the top you still have the same mapping options to automatically do things like map backslash to an underscore or vice versa. You have options when it comes to importing deviation data or two-way time data, whether your x and y's are dx dy's or relative rather than absolute values. Then you have the same options that you used to have with regard to adding new wells to the project. When you make any changes up here, the rematch wells button will refresh this section at the bottom. The only rematched unmatched wells does what it says in the tin. If you've already matched some and you hit rematch with this ticked on, it will only work on the ones that haven't found a match already. Alright, again, if you've got extra spaces in there, we can remove those to keep things consistent for your database. The filter is very much like we just discussed in the data side of things, so you could type in particular wells that you want to find. Again, this is really handy when you've got hundreds of wells coming in from a large well header file, for example. And then you have filters over here as to whether you find just the matched wells or the unmatched wells displayed on this table. So like I said, when you've got lots and lots going on in this table, the filters can help a lot with that. So once we have this all set up, we are able to press the import button. What's happened is all of those matchings for the data and the well header information has been run through, and we are presented with this table at the end, with a breakdown of information as to did something not work, did something work that you need to go and check, and a lot of that will depend on whether you have chosen to merge things, to overwrite things. So you can see here I have some data that came in for a well that failed. So there's an invalid depth value is the information I'm getting from here. I can have a look at the warnings and say, okay, well we've brought something in, but we do have duplicated intervals. And again, that's nothing to worry about. This could be because I chose to keep all of my data. So in order for me to go in and have a look at these things, I can double click. It will open up the specific well and the data types, or the data table in this case, because it's a collection data table, for what my S2 values are, basically everything in that table that I brought in. What's going on here? Let me see if I really want to do that. Alright, so what you will see is this is the collection table now in my data that was brought in. I have a range of data, so can you see here I've got three rows that are the same depth. Now previously you would not have seen all 3 of these. The database would have pulled them in and stored them for you, but it would have only used the topmost or the first version or the first row of that data coming in. So you might not have seen all 3 ranges of data for that one sample type. So that's one of the new things that came in for 2021, being able to store multiple runs for the same sample, for example, and work with all of these data sets. Okay, identify where there might be an anomalous number. and work from that when it comes to displaying it. So this access directly to all of this data, it's looking for issues for you to then go and check. Okay? So the information, it's really quite good, this report, in that it'll tell you there's something going on with the depth here, and there's an anomaly detected at around the same depth for all of these. So there's something going on there. We can go and have a look and find that out, delete things if we need to, and go from there. Alright? Same with the info. It's the exact same kind of thing. It's something's happening. We've removed data because we asked it to. We have updated, coming in for new information for each of the data types for each of the wells that has been brought in. So clicking on any of these headers will sort on those alphabetically for you to look at. For well to well, there's things that have been modified and existing things have been removed, and then it'll give you a breakdown of how many of these elements and what was actually done to them. Okay, same for the successes. So straight away, these many things we have data added with no question or no need for you to go look any deeper at these data elements. Alright, so once you've done this, you can save that report out, and it's just going to be a text file. So tab or comma separated out, and you can store that for future reference. You can also filter these results looking for certain things based on what it is that you're interested in. Alright, so any of the columns, it's what it's looking for, and then you've got these filters. Alright, once you're finished, you can close this and you're ready to start working with that data. One of the next areas I want to talk about are some of the data management additions that we've put in. And one of the first visual ones I want to talk you through are the dictionary sorting. So it's the same for both graphic and text dictionaries. What this allows you to do is move beyond, for the graphic dictionaries, the alphabetical sorting. So you'll see down on the bottom right with this new section here that it allows us to select a unit and click custom, and we now have the ability to move units up and down as we want to see them. So we have no lockdown to the alphabetical listings anymore. And as soon as you have made any changes, you can hit the Save Sort button and move on to a different dictionary. It doesn't matter, the sorting won't matter, or it's not dependent on the editing. So if you go in and edit any of these, it's not going to reset any of the ordering. It will base it on the order that was saved. Same goes for the text dictionaries. In originally 2019 and previous, you would have been working with the youngest and oldest being what ordered the elements in the dictionary. So choose a different dictionary, and instead of this being sorted on these numbers, I can go in and change it by name, which in this case is the same. And I go to custom, I can select something and reorder these. So you can see I've got everything there. If I then decide I want to change those to something else, it's going to ask me, because I didn't save those changes like I did with our graphic dictionary, it's going to ask us, you've changed things, but you're about to change that manual change you made. Do you want to save that, yes or no? And if you say no, it will go back and allow you to sort things back the way we were, but the custom is back empty, as it were. So if we quickly do that again, you'll see the changes. Go back here, hit yes this time. When you move things from age and name are the same because that's how they were sorted originally. Go back to custom, you'll see that my SW and my DT have swapped over. Yeah, and that's it saved now for future use. So when you go into any of your data browsers or editing data and you want to choose that element from the dictionary, the order you see there will reflect what you have saved them as. The other element I want to talk about now, we've talked about data management wise from the reports from the import. You could go in and look at the collection data and you could see the multiple depths, right? We've talked about that already. The other option is about when you are working in a new database, we have added in the option to allow you to decide when it comes to working with stratigraphic data that you have the stratigraphic data ticked on here. For the data types, we've added in a strat gradient option. So what this is opening up to you is whether you work in a top-down or a bottom-up scenario. So I know a lot of our geologists work from older to younger. They work their way up the well when they're interpreting. So they would say Cretaceous to lower Paleocene. Whereas if you were working down the way, you would say things like Paleocene to Upper Cretaceous, that kind of thing. So when it comes to displaying those and looking at those on your charts, the colour gradients from your dictionaries on your data panels, the orientation of the text will say one first and then a dash and then the other. So what we've allowed is you, going forward, the default is still top to bottom because that's what 2019 and everything else previous used. Going forward, when you're setting up a new database, or if you're willing to go in and do some work on your data, you can switch this over to be an older to younger, a bottom to top scenario. And that is a database level change. It's not just for projects or not just for wells. It is the whole data set for all of the database. So just be aware of that. If you're going to go in and change that, it will affect all of that, in that case, formation. Now that we're back on the map, there's a few things I want to show you here, hopefully to get done quite quickly. Now that we have, we've brought in our data, next step is to get in and have a look at that visuals, right? So I am quickly going to do some bubbles, and I'm going to turn off some queries so we've got some more room. And I'm going to do a component bubble, and I'm going to look for a particular, oh good, it's already set up. So I'm going to look for a particular zone. I am going to infer stratigraphy, so my stratigraphy toolbar should appear. So what we'll do is make better room for it. And I'm going to look for a lithology breakdown. So as this is not new. This is exactly how it used to work. You've chosen your zones, and you have your results. So what we can do now, however, is not just look at the lithology within the sprite group or formation. We can actually dig deeper, so not just within the sprite, but within a particular lithology. We could go and look for the fascies, or in the chord interval of the sprite, we could go and look for the fascies, the lithology, the porosities, the whatever, the grain sizes, right? Coarse, medium, fine. Whatever data you have, you can choose a second zone to work with. So if we go up and just find, I know I've got some lithofascies data. So if we go in and try and look within here, do I have any lacustrine? Let's see. And hit apply. There we go. So within my lacustrine, within the sprite, I have the breakdown of the lithologies that I find in there. What I can also do is I have, this is highlighting we have an incomplete of our sprite zone. So the ZOI is still the sprite. The subzone is cutting out a fraction of that doesn't, excuse me, hiccups, included with those, and we can also have this limited by the subzone coverage, so the whole circle becomes subzone rather than sprite. It's lacustrine within the sprite. So visually you have the flexibility to do that. You also have, if we turn that off really quickly, what's happened is that tick box for the subzone changes to the coverage of your parameter under investigation. So anywhere that you had an incomplete interpretation, like in this well here, it becomes a full circle. What's been added is the ability now to choose a stratigraphically aware range of data. So where we had a top and a base that were different before, if it could not find that named unit within the wells, it would not be able to plot them on the map. Goodness me, a mental block there. So when you go in and you change all of these to a wider range and infer that stratigraphy, it's updating your toolbar up at the top, so you still have the ability to step up and down, that's not changed. Okay, but what's changing is the smarts behind it all. It's not just looking for the fairy and the elf, it's looking for, okay, if you don't have fairy, have you got the sprite or the kelpie or whatever else was in that range of zones. So the fairy, the pixie, there we go, pixie, kelpie, sprite, and then elf. Okay, so you have, it's picking up all of those. If it's not named, then it still looks for the widest range within that zone. Okay, that's the smarts that have been added in here. There are another couple of things on the maps that I think will just make your life so much better. There has been a new shortcut button added, so if you hit the Alt key on your keyboard, you are now able to select multiple well names together and drag those. See how the boxes are moving like this? Drag them to different positions around the wells relative to where you have dragged from where they were. So a click off just is a quick way to unselect them. Alright, and let's go for this one as well. Release the Alt key and then you can click and drag the selected well names. You can still do them one at a time, of course, but that's there. The other thing I wanted to show you was for GIS, much like the dictionaries, oh my goodness me, the dictionaries, you now have a bit more detail as to how these are ordered. So right now they're alphabetical, but you know there's a button there that will sort them that way. But you are able, if you click your mouse and you'll see the arrows, or those blue ones now, click in this box to the right, you can move these so that the order, click and drag, the order in here is slightly different. So what that means really when you're doing any kind of gradients or colour changes, that kind of thing, if you have them set this way, then you can update them really quickly. There we go. So last but not least, let's move on to the correlations and show you some of the really exciting tie improvements that we've added in, okay? Building correlations is the same as you would have used previously. Let's pick a few wells. That'll do. And we can go in and, oh good, oh that's all set. Apply depths. And one of the new things that's been added is on the scale tab, we now have this plot interwell distances. Now this is a new element we've added for each pair of wells on a correlation. Whether building on the correlation or a chart that you open, it's an object you can right click, insert. You now have the ability to include those. So the calculations will be based much like if you were measuring distance on the map from well to well in pairs. And what we've done is when you tick this on, automatically this is set to 100, so it's got enough room to put as much text as it can in there. Obviously the panel separation is something you can change later anyway. Excellent. So now we have our 6 wells and each pair has a gap between with a text box in there. So if we zoom in and have a look, you will see the interwell distances have the well name on either side and the surface position measurement from surface to surface. Double clicking or right click properties will get you in here. Now you have complete control over how this looks and what information is given in this text box. You can show the well names or not. Down here's a little preview of what it'll look like afterwards. You can have it use kilometres, feet, metres, that kind of thing, whatever's going to work for your scaling. Show the position. Now this is whether you're using surface position or terminal position for the measurements. So if you have a highly deviated well, be aware of what it is that you want to calculate from. Alright, and then you have the show position, so that's going to give the labeling SP or TP for surface position and terminal position. And then you've got the standards, set your fonts up, pick a different colour if you want to, the style that you want them to be, the size that you want them to be is all for you to decide whether you want the border. All of this standard, choose your visuals, okay? And once you have set it up the way you want to, you can either hit OK, which will apply the changes and close that box to that box, okay? What we also have, much like the ties properties, we've got that apply to all option, which will then work its way through each of those and highlight the change. So again, apply to all modifies every single interwell distance on that correlation chart, okay? Now, the nice new part that I want to go through with you is the ties manager now has the ability to help you build fancier ties visually. So we've split them up into what we talk about are gradient ties and spectral ties. Now, the gradient ties are in use where you have data. So you can see in these middle two wells, I have a colour gradient downhole here from a yellow to, let's say, a purple. And what we're doing now is, if we can find that unit, we can show it in the ties manager, and you get to see the colour fill, and obviously everything else is the same in here. The defaults come from the dictionaries as always. What you can do, however, if we then go in and choose the turtle, up under here, this used to just be opening up the pen. We now have the option here to set the brush, so as standard we can change the colour. We can set it to be the default, which generally will be the dictionary colour, or the spectral. So this will look familiar from when you're setting up your data panels and choosing that gradient for the colour aspect. You get to choose the curve that you want to use and the range that you want, whether you're using the data limits or whether you're using something that you want to use. And then the colours, again, same as anywhere else. If you have a particular colour that you want to highlight things with, then you can choose that. Okay, so thins to, or lows to highs even, left to right there. So you see it's highlighting on here. Now if I move this slightly out of the way, if I click on, like always, we have that tie appearing. Okay, so you can see I've got lighter colours here, I've got lighter colours here. We'll zoom in and have a look at those, but what I'm going to do is just tie everything. There we go. So it's picking up the setup in here, and we can now go in and have a look. Now, if we zoom in this area here, we will see what's happening. So the detail of this, what I need to show you so that you can maneuver this about now. This chart's 6 wells, but I do have, you know, a lot of ties on here. I've got the spectral ties, I've got my gradient ties that are a vertical gradient, right? I have my, where it's finding things, brilliant. What I want to do is really quickly show you, if I delete these, manual ties will also have the ability to use a horizontal gradient or a lateral gradient. So if I go in here and tie to, so my stag, if I tie that to my hedgehog, same as normal, do you want them to be a range or just a single name? So we hit yes. We get our stag colour on the left and our hedgehog colour on the right. So again, it's that lateral change using colours to help get your eye in, much like this is helping with the vertical. So if we scroll on here, if we have a fairy and a kelpie specifically chosen, they are treated just like the other ties, right? They go halfway across, or whatever your ties preferences are set up to do. That is what it's doing, okay? Once you've decided what it is that you want to visualize, you are able to go back in and change the properties. So any of these units can be accessed and changed. So the default is going to be there. You can go in and change that to be another brush or a spectral tie. So again, choosing the curve, it picks up the last one that you set up. You click OK to that, and then you have the option here to apply it to that one unit, or apply to all. We'll go through and find all those kelpies and assign this to there. What we need to realise is when you go in and reshape a tie, the spectral tie disappears and it goes back to the last brush that was assigned. But when you're working with spectral ties, one thing that I need you to be aware of is when it comes to the resolution of these ties, it can seem quite blocky, especially when you compare it to what you see in the data panels. That's all about the chart preferences. So when it comes to the display and moving around, you want it to be as fast as you possibly can, and trying to draw and pick up and do the math on every meter's worth of spectral fill for the ties can take a lot of headspace for IC or for the computer. So what we recommend is working in preview mode when you're working and doing the big moves and looking at things at that scale, but when you need to go in and look at things in a bit more detail, turning off preview mode is exactly the same as setting this to 1. Okay. So we go and turn that off. Oh, I've just moved everything. To be the higher resolution, so you can see the finer detail in the values coming from the curves that you've used. Okay. The last couple of things I want to show you are on the chart still. So what I'm going to do is switch over to another chart and have a look at a bit more detail. There are elements in the edit data that we can access and use slightly differently now. So the data entry form has split out a set thickness that is greyed out unless you have the add button on, and you can set in a thickness of however many meters we'd like to see in here, and the data is all the same. The snapping is all about the depth at which the divisible snapping can happen. So if you put a 0 in, there's no snapping. That's up to you. Where you click is where the 20 meters at this case will start drawing from. So if I have overwrite on, because what I'm going to do is add in a bit more detail to this pale blue section here. There we go. So where I've clicked, I have my 20 meters. If we go in to browse that data, there we go. So we will see that the fluvials have been added in right there. All right. Now the only other changes on here really are the fact that there's a no snap option missing, because 0 means no snap. If you type that in and use 20, and when you are adding in new units, you can add those directly and it will snap to the closest 20, or it could snap to the closest 0.05. So the scale is entirely up to you what you need. You can use those. All right. So the last thing to show you before we finish up is the ghost trace capability. Now I know this will be exciting for some of you because you've been asking for this for a while, but we now have the ability to see a transparent, there we go, a transparent background, so we can actually fit these ghost traces a bit better to our other wells. Alright, so the last thing to really talk to you about is the work that we've done in 2021 is all about trying to improve that workflow from getting started through your exploration, mapping and intuitive correlations, and the ability to see the data in a better light, in a more detailed light. And we've pulled in that zonal analysis information. The interactive editing on charts is phenomenal. Now that you can build up really quickly and have that snapping be very flexible for you. The only other thing to mention really is if you have any questions, obviously please do get in touch. I'm always at the other end of an email, and we have any questions in the meantime. If you can't get a hold of me, open up the help file and you can see a list of the bigger features that we've added in, and even from the previous versions, and search through and find the area that you're interested in and have a look at that. Alright, so thank you so much for your time today. We're about to go and do live Q&A, so I've got Andy on hand to help me with those. So please do type in your questions and we'll get through them. Okay?
Okay. There we go. Okay, so for the first question we have here is, for the spectral fill ties, am I restricted to just log curves, or can I use point value data too?
So sorry, I was about to get you to answer that and you just asked the question. So the spectral ties are curve based. So just like in the data panels, it's the exact same form and it will take you to the selection, and it's just limited to curves. So yes, you are limited to the curves, but any of the curves that you have in the database or project.
Okay, and we got another one here. So in the dictionary sort options, is this saved for individual users or is it for all users?
So the dictionary sorting is it's dictionaries database wide. It's not tied to a specific user. So because we have, I can't remember if it's 2018 or 19, we brought in the privileges for the users that allowed them to modify dictionaries or just use them. If you have the privileges with that user login to change dictionary, you can, but it will change it for everybody using that dictionary in the database. Just trying to keep that consistency for everybody. So if you decided that, you know, your unit B should always be above your unit X, then, you know, everyone will have that same rule applied. Okay.
So let's see, how do we lower, oh, so sorry, it helps if I can read properly. How do my lower confidence zones work with all of these stratigraphic driven ties?
I'm assuming that the lower confidence is where you have a qualifier like a question mark or some other symbol to identify them. When it comes to, I should be sharing my screen with IC, but what happens is when you're in the ties manager or using the data, there's normally an ignore qualifiers tick box. So if you have that ticked on, what it will do is if you have a question mark Andy formation, and then in the dictionary it's just an Andy formation, if you ignore that question mark, it will get treated like any other Andy formation.
Okay, thank you. Now next up we have, so will the new importer support a file with multiple data types that don't have their own individual columns?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the features that was in the old importer that we made sure we brought over was the filtering. Now I'm not sure if any of you would have used the filtering or not, but it's more transparent now. I think it's in that matching section up in the top right corner. You've got your incoming column, you've got your database matched column where you can choose a data type or the legend or the depth and all of those things. The third column is titled filter. And it basically means for any of the columns in the incoming file, you can type in a text string of, let's say, formation or Andy formation, or you know, any of those. If you type in that, it will filter it and will just bring those in. And again, when you save the templates that you can reload the next time you're bringing in a similar file, it will pick all that up and save you having to do it again and again. So you could have one that filters out formation, you could have one that filters out group, you could have one that filters out member, you can have one that filters, you know, and have a template saved for each of those. And all it is, you know, you give it a name that makes sense, and you'll be able to pick it up, find it really easily the next time. So yes, is a short answer.
Okay, magic. So I saw on the slides that you listed RPM. What has been changed with the RPM module?
Oh gosh, yes. All right. Sorry, I should have actually shown you some RPM. One of the things that came in for RPM was from the database side, we've done a bit of tidying up, but we've also done from the visual point of view on mapping. Those of you that will have used RPM will have been in touch, because this was something that a lot of people had asked for, was when it comes to displaying the markers, so the time-based query results, basically, you know, your symbol could change or the color could change. These are our RPM markers. They were always showing up at the surface position. So when you had deviated wells, they were all just sitting on top of each other, and it made very little sense. What we've added in is the flexibility for the RPM markers to tie in with where your well label is displayed. So if you're using terminal position on a deviated well or an event, then we've opened it up, so we're able to use terminal position now, so it's all spread out a bit more, and you can get a better understanding of what's happening across your field. So yes, that was the nice big visual that I was very excited about for RPM that went in this time.
Okay, and now, like I said, if there's any more questions, please do kind of add them in. So this is our last one, which is, you know, typically our planted one. So what's next for IC?
So right now, I actually have some of you on the call, actually, or on the webinar, might have been in touch with you already, and I appreciate the feedback. Right now, we are looking at how we can improve the use of our databases with multiple users and multiple, in this case, interpretations. So our current project is all about expanding and ensuring that interpretations are actually working the way that will be helpful for everybody. The next thing on our hit list is the Petrel link, and I can hear the cheers. From everybody that uses the Petrel link. So again, it's trying to amalgamate, get all that feedback from you in line with us. Obviously, we're heading with the subsurface software, you know, Derek has a plan that we're heading up towards making things easier for everybody. But what we're doing is the baby steps that will get us up that mountain, as it were. So it's interpretations now, Petrel next, and after that, Andy's very excited that we'll be looking at the stratigraphy and ties again. So I will be, if any of you, this is my shameless plug here, if any of you work with any of these areas, please email me, get in touch, because I would love to have you involved with our development. We've rejigged things internally and how we work our development now. So I want to have more direct client interaction with the whole team. So if you are able and willing, please get in touch, and I'd love to pick your brains in a bit more detail. And that was it. Was that our last question?
Yep, that's the last one. We don't have any more. So if you do think of any of the others, as Kat says, please do get in touch with either herself, myself, or the support team as well. Well, we're all always happy to hear from yourselves. So I think that's us for now. So thank you for attending the webinar, and no doubt we'll speak soon. Oh, no, that's just
Thanks,
just a thanks. Thank you.
That's great. Look, we've even got 1 minute left. It was perfect timing.
That's good.
I think actually, before you all disappear, the release notes, go and have a look. There's a lot of things, a lot of little bits that I didn't have time to go into in the demo. So go and have a look at the release notes that you can get through the help ribbon. There's a release notes. Go and have a look, and just make sure you're aware of everything that went in. There's just too much to do in an hour. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye now.